Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
What made you sort of choose this topic today, other than the fact that we haven't covered it yet?
That's true. We haven't covered it, and it fascinates me. As a psychic medium, and when we go on paranormal investigations, more often than not, I will sort of sense a child spirit as I'm going through the home. And because I find often with children spirits, I don't know if you've noticed, Seeker, they tend to be more playful. It sounds a bit obvious, but they obviously seem to be very lonely, and need comforting is what I find. I often feel that children's spirits are very misunderstood. I know when my girls were much younger, they claim to see things. They would say, "Oh, I've got a friend," and there was no friend there. And I
Oh,
just knew in my heart, I just knew it was a child spirit that they were seeing, that they were playing with, and they didn't realize any difference. So,
right.
there's that aspect to it too when it comes to child spirits, and they just take on a different presence, I feel, from typical spirits.
Yeah,
And I know,
different. I think when
what comes into question is paranormal intentions with the child. Like, if it's a child spirit, what are their intentions? Are they lost?
right.
Um, mhm.
So, Ian, what do you think about that? I mean, obviously, because you're not a medium or psychic, you're the technical side of this. So you're on an investigation with the equipment, and you're looking for, ways to either, bust the idea that it's actually a spirit, or, you might get something. But from your experience, what have you picked up, or what have you experienced in terms of being on an investigation and using equipment?
I feel that child spirits are lost, and
Okay.
that's been my experience in the ones that I have encountered during my paranormal investigations. Is that every single time the child appears to be lost, they're looking for their mother. They're looking for their family.
So do you think they're actually lost, or is it that they aren't sure, they don't know that they've passed, maybe? Is, more of what
I
could be happening. Because to me, like a child, when they're lost, they are probably in a great deal of distress. And I know from child spirits that I've encountered that I don't find them very distressed, but I do find them almost as if they are still with the living.
Still
So
with
I
us,
don't know. And
yes.
I'm curious, like, and that doesn't mean that that is the way it is. That's just the way it has been for me in my experience. But for you, like, have you gotten things that really make you feel like that child is not sure where they are? And if that's the case, do you think it's because they don't know that they're not here physically anymore? Or is it that you feel like they're actually lost? They don't know how to find their way to where they're supposed to be, or family, or whatever the
And
case may
that's
be.
what we're debating on the show today,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Now, when I
Like
say that
Timmy, do you
they're
remember Timmy?
quote lost, I don't mean that they don't know
Yeah,
where they
like
are. I have
lost in the
encountered
woods.
three
Oh,
situations, and all three of them, they knew exactly where they were.
okay.
So
Okay.
they're not
Lost,
lost in the sense
right.
that they have no idea where they are. They're and in every situation, and all three, they're looking for their mother.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, a
Yes.
child would be looking for their mother in a time of, the unknown. And like I say, I'm not certain that they know or don't know that they aren't physically here anymore. And I think that's not just child spirits, that's spirits in general sometimes. They don't have the awareness that they've physically passed. But I find with children it is because there's that innocence and that they don't have the same grasp on life and death as adults
Right.
do. And so I find that, like you said, Rachel, it is it's different. It's a different kind of spirit. Like, I've never come across
Yes.
a malevolent child spirit,
No, nor have I. No.
bad, or and my viewpoint, I don't believe in demons and angels and all of that stuff. I wasn't raised that way. I don't have religion in my background, but I do believe that bad people, when they pass, are still bad people. So
True.
but I haven't really come across that with any children that I've encountered. And I don't tend to encounter a lot of children. I'm actually kind of it while people around me, and that's why, like I say, I like to investigate with folks like Ian and yourself, other mediums, other people, because I don't always pick up on them. And I think it's just that whole vibration level thing that we spoke about before in other shows, is that my vibration level tends to be much lower. So I tend
Yes.
to pick up more on adults than I do on children. But when I do pick up on children, it's usually very much like, boom, there they are. They just
Yes. Yes.
my face, literally. So let's talk about a couple of stories that we've experienced. And
Yes.
let's start with Rachel. If you want to give us a story. And I know you mentioned Timmy, and yes, I do remember this story. If you want to
Oh,
talk.
yes. You're Timmy, but that's not my story.
Right,
I
okay, so
was doing a paranormal investigation, and it was a team that had decided to let another person join the team for the night. She was a volunteer, she was brand new to the team, and we were investigating, I believe it was Shadowgate, New York.
okay.
And that area in particular has a lot of history, a lot of perhaps Native American history. I'd have to look into it more, but I was invited to go along for the paranormal experience, and I was going with the team. And this other person was new, so we go, and this was a house that had a lot of activity. I felt, in my interpretation, I felt that I was picking up a lot. And as we go into the building itself, I'm sensing something behind me. And you know how with children they're very playful. It's a game to them. They like to, and I sensed that straight away. I just knew, and I could tell. I don't know if you understand this too, Zika. That it seemed to me I identified it as a child spirit, but it was a female child spirit. It was a girl of about 6, and she was wearing what looked like a white blouse and a sort of brown skirt, and she had blonde hair and blue eyes. And yep, so she was, as we were doing the investigation, she kept following me around. She wasn't saying anything, but she was definitely there.
So Ian,
Mm.
for you, what do what's something that sticks in your mind on your investigations that you found that really has evidence per se that you've collected in terms of a child spirit?
Oh my gosh.
You probably have a lot.
Okay, I
Yes.
do,
Oh, yeah.
and I have encountered several spirits of children through my years of doing
Mhm.
paranormal investigation. And so let me take you through it. What I've encountered. I'm going to start with the most recent experience, and I'm going to then work my way backwards, okay?
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, so the very most recent one was last winter. I was involved in 2 public ghost hunt paranormal investigations in Niagara-on-the-Lake at
Okay.
the old courthouse building.
All right. I'm familiar with it.
And
Okay.
at the
Sounds
very
good.
first one, at the end of the night, there was a spirit board session / seance, if you want to describe it like that, using a spirit board. And there was a child spirit that came through the board and kept saying,
Oh,
Mama, Mama, Mama. Now, we never got any further information out of the spirit other than that. He or she kept coming through saying, Mama, Mama, Mama.
Sounds like a young
And, sorry, what's that?
that sounds like a very young child, probably someone,
yes.
the age of 3 or
Yes,
under.
well, I've got continuation of that, because on the second event that took place there, I was running my spirit box, and I received an ITC EVP over the spirit box
Wow.
of a child said, Mama, which
Nice.
validates the
What you were
previous
getting.
session through the spirit board.
So I think it's really interesting because I've had numerous experiences in my my lifetime, but there's a couple that really stick with me, and one of them is people can watch me talk about it on an Arby's commercial of all things.
That's right. The cemetery. I
Yeah.
love that advert. It's my favorite ever.
I'm actually discussing a child spirit, and Ian, you'd be familiar with the location because this was at Ruthven. And Rachel, since you have not seen Ruthven is this lovely old home that's in a location somewhere between me and Ian, really, in terms of driving. But it used to be an entire town called Indiana, and it's gone now. It's a ghost town, but back in the 1800s, the mid 1800s, it was a very important location in terms of logging and mills, grist mills and logging and things like this in a region that was becoming newly settled in terms of communities popping up. So I happened to be at the Ruthven home again in conjunction with Ian's friend who has the ghost walks. We were guides at one of their Halloween walks at Ruthven, and I was in the cemetery dressed in my widow's weeds, much like I am in the commercial. So I was wearing sort of mid 1860s widow's weeds. And I'm in the cemetery, and there was another person there with me as well. It wasn't just myself. And then Ed was in the Irish cemetery for the evening. And it was interesting because I've been in this cemetery, I don't know how many times, many times in the past. Most often just in terms of visiting and wandering, and I do feel things while I'm there. I do sort of pick up on things. But this night was very interesting because I was very focused, and I was standing in the cemetery waiting for guests to come in, and I showed them around the cemetery and we talked. And what was really interesting was that before this ramped up, I was down there chatting with another guide, and I was wearing a veil underneath my hat. So I have a hat attached to my head, and I had a long veil, and it was quite long. I mean, it wasn't just a short, it came right down over most of the upper part of my body. And as I was standing, I could feel this tugging on the back of my veil. And I thought for a second, because it was a little bit, I thought it got sort of fence, or the gate have those it's like metal picketed fencing there. So I thought, oh, maybe the wind caught it, and I was moving, and I was like, and I looked, and there was absolutely nothing there. I wasn't caught, and it kept tugging and tugging, and just tugged hard enough that it pulled the veil out from under my hat. Now my hat was tied to my head, so my hat, the veil came right out the back of my outfit and ended up on the ground. And so I picked it up and I couldn't make any sense out of it in that moment. I mean, obviously there's quite a few spirits in that cemetery, Ian, as you know. It's an oddly active cemetery because I find for the most part cemeteries are pretty quiet. Not a lot of people are hanging around in the cemetery that have passed because first of all, they've passed not in the cemetery. And so their spirit is wherever else it may choose to be. But in the case of this is family property. So these kids would have been playing in this area probably pretty frequently, just in terms of being in the home and on the property. Because as you know, Ian, it kind of has that nice little frontage on the Grand River. So the kids would have probably families might have gone down there for picnics or might have gone down to play or even swim in the river. So I'm not really thinking about it at the time, but as the evening progresses, people are coming through, people are taking photographs while they're there. And I'm standing by the tabletop tomb that's in there. I'm standing there talking with a guest and I suddenly feel this sort of grip around my knees. Motion? Yes, like a hug, like a small child, 4-year-old, 3-year-old. As I say this in the commercial as well. It was like a little kid that runs up to you and is like, oh, and hugs you around the legs and holds on.
Oh.
And so I was feeling this at the time. Now, I didn't assess the situation. I mean, I was in a different sort of headspace at that time. We were talking about the family and the cemetery and things that go on there. But later on, when we went back to the coach house, where everybody sort of congregated after the tours, there were a number of people who had taken pictures in that cemetery and had a lot of these little misty figures that looked like small children. It was not foggy that night. It was not misty. And I don't know, Ian, if you have ever experienced that in the Ruthven Cemetery.
No.
There was quite a number of photographs that looked like small little shapes of children moving around in that cemetery that night. Yeah. And they were, again, playing. They weren't, aggressive or forceful. Like that little child that ran up to me, hugged me around the legs. And perhaps, as I say, on the commercial, maybe I reminded them of their grandmother or their mother or who knows, right? But it was just an interesting experience. And do I know who that child was? No, but that cemetery has a number of children in there that passed during the Spanish flu. And so in the sort of, between about 1912 and about 1918 or so, 1920, there was quite a number of the children in that family, unfortunately, who passed from Spanish flu. So could it be one of them? Maybe it was. I mean, it was interesting. And that's probably one of the most memorable experiences for me in terms of a child sort of making that attempt to communicate, but I'm not able to identify who that child was or is. I kind of want to put it out there for people. Is it like, have you experienced this in terms of maybe when you're ghost hunting or you've just visited somewhere? Have you had the feeling that there's been a child spirit?
I'm going to throw this out here too. When I was a child, I didn't realize I was looking at child spirits.
Right. And I was the same.
And my mom was like, it was a family member who had passed away, a child in the family that had passed. And I didn't know any of that. And apparently I did accidentally distress people by mentioning that child's name. I'm playing with, I was outside and I was playing with them. I didn't even think anything of it. And I came in and I told my mom I'm playing with whoever, I can't remember. And apparently no one was there. So yeah, even when I was a kid. So
no one was there, but in reality, somebody is there. It's just that other people don't necessarily pick up.
They are.
But I do find it interesting that these things. It just with spirits in general. I mean, a lot of people will naysay, and that's on them. I mean, they have their right to their opinion. I live in a different world.
Country. We do,
Yeah,
don't we? Yeah, it was like the picture last week, last time we discussed the picture is like, I know what logic tells me, and I know what, being a member of the spiritual community tells me. And
right.
they're
And
two
that's the
separate
thing, right? I mean,
things.
there's many of us out there who this is not shut off in their brain. And so we have this ability to pick up on this. And you don't have to believe in it. It doesn't make a difference to me. I know what my life is. So, and Ian, you don't have that ability, but yet you are a part of the community that does do the research to try and prove the existence of, child spirits, adult spirits, animal spirits, whatever it might be. And so while it's considered pseudoscience at this point, all science was considered pseudoscience at some
Of course,
point.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of what I like to put out there to people. It's like, well, you don't have any facts, you don't have any evidence. Well, there is quite a lot of evidence out there. Because sometimes, to me, this is another thing I do want to mention. Sometimes people their spirits present themselves in a way that will get them the most attention. And, there's no physical body attached to your energy once you pass into the universe. So I think that if you can manifest it in a way that perhaps was a better part of your life, or maybe a really bad part of your life. You could be a child, you could be an adult. I don't think that spirits necessarily have to present themselves as in the age that they passed. And that might be controversial to some people. But, when we're talking about energy that can come together and form something that's visual, I think the possibilities are whatever they want or think will get them the most attention.
I agree with that.
Exactly.
I
Definitely.
agree with that. Another example I have, staying on that theme, is a number of years ago, we did a paranormal investigation at Castle Kilbride
Oh, yes,
in
familiar with that as well.
in Baden, Ontario. Actually setting up the ghost walk that takes place there today. And yeah, you talk about that exact subject, that we were drawn to the bedroom of Laura Louise. Her favorite toy was this doll. And this doll actually still exists in the room today. And when we were doing the paranormal investigation, we were allowed access into all the rooms where normally they're stanchioned off. You can stand in the doorway, you can't go in, but we were given full access to go right into the rooms. And we focused our investigation on this, favorite doll of Laura Louise. And again, we're setting up our spirit box, and not much came through. And so I said at one point, okay, well, why don't we take a break? Let's go out into the hallway, get some air, and then we'll come back. And as soon as we walked out into that hallway, this child's female voice screamed over the spirit box, "Come back."
Wow.
Oh,
And we believe
wow.
that's Laura Louise. But as you say, Seika, okay, in reality, Laura Louise lived into her 80s or 90s.
Right.
She was not a
Oh.
child when she passed away, but we got this energy coming through as a child, and we believe it was Laura Louise.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
it is
say it. I feel with bedrooms, like children's bedrooms,
right.
have there's something definitely more with children's bedrooms as well. How
I think
interesting that you said
anybody's
she lived
bedroom.
to her 80s, but you definitely felt that was her. It could well be. I had such an attachment to my bedroom.
Mhm.
And the neighbors actually said that they thought they saw me. They would think that they were seeing me in the bedroom, but we'd moved away. I wasn't
Wow.
there anymore. So
Right. You were telegraphing your memories into, you know,
yes,
but
perhaps.
it's interesting. It, it's an interesting thought because, again, this has happened quite a number of times for me where I know that the spirit that I've encountered has lived into adulthood. And yet they're presenting themselves as a child. And it could be too, in terms of the bell tower, I will say the one boy that was upstairs, not in the choir loft, but in the secret room, he had been so traumatized that I think that really stayed with him. And that is, to present in that manner, that was something that was pivotal in his life in terms of a traumatic experience. And so therefore, maybe that was the worst thing he had ever experienced. And it was pretty bad, I'm going to say, what happened in there. But again, I know that he didn't pass away as a young man either. So it is interesting that, when we cross paths with child spirits, are they truly children, or are they, adults who are presenting themselves at periods in their lives that either made them happy or perhaps something traumatic or, untowards took place, maybe an illness, maybe something, maybe a tragedy in the family. They lost a sibling, a parent, whatever. It's kind of imprinted in their energy code, if you like, and that is how they present. The only time that I will say yes 100% to a child spirit is when you receive the information and then you can verify it that they have passed on as a child. But when you get information and then you start to go look and you realize they lived till they were 65 or 80 or
Yeah.
it's then
Yeah,
you have
I believe it's both, because
right.
I've also encountered a child spirit, and we have verified that he passed away when he was 5 years old.
Right, and exactly. And generally, when you do your research, that's where you're going to find your answers. But when you find out that they present as a child but passed as an adult, I think it's actually even a more interesting story, because you have to ask yourself, what made them come back, present themselves as a child, and why?
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon.